Welcome to another edition of the Comic Anthologist, and if you're tuning in for the first time,
hit that subscribe button.
And also hit that bell for any notices or anything that we basically come up with from time to time that will alert you to anything special that does come up.
And also, too, I might add, if anytime, whenever we talk about past comic history and you find a discrepancy, please let us know. Just send it to the email and just email us at
thecomicanthologist@gmail.com.
Okay.
Well, today we are going to talk about the origin of Doomsday. And we just briefly discussed recently about Doomsday Superman when it was basically the storyline called The Death of Superman.
Right.
Now, this is one of those things where it was a 3-issue limited series that came out in
April of 1994.
Exactly. It came out April of 1994, and it was called Hunter Prey. And this basically highlighted the origin of Doomsday.
Right.
Now, Doomsday, if you've seen the Death of Superman cartoon,
And then also Batman versus Superman.
and also too, if you've read any of the original comics that came out from back in the day, you would notice that he had somewhat of an ability to fly, and also he was getting stronger the more he was exposed to sunlight. Well, there's no accident behind that, because Doomsday initially was created and cloned, and this is when Krypton, and cloned on Krypton in its distant past. They don't say when in the distant past.
It was just a distant past. Now, imagine this. Imagine taking a baby and
A cloned
a
child.
clone child, and then sending it out into the wilderness to be torn apart by wild beasts and animals or whatever. Imagine that happening thousands and thousands and thousands of times over the course of 20, maybe 30 years.
Exactly, and what they're doing is they send the baby out, and it lasts a few seconds. Then they have to go out and collect the remains, clone those remains, and then send the baby back out once it's cloned up again. And they kept doing that process over and over, and the beings at that time, the wild beasts of that time, kept tearing that baby apart every time. But the thing is this, every time it got sent out there, it lasted longer and longer and longer. It got to a point where it was able to grow up in the harshest environment on
And then
Krypton,
it started adapting to the animals that was killing it multiple times.
until the animals started killing it. But eventually, it found a way to go after those animals and kill them. But might I add, every time they cloned that child, it got to a point where that humanoid child didn't even look like a human anymore. It started looking more like a baby version of Doomsday.
Right.
And
And at the time, the baby wasn't even, or the being known that was soon to be known as Doomsday wasn't even called Doomsday.
no. And the thing is, the person who created it, his name was Bertrand. And he had no scruples or no qualms about sending a child out to be torn apart by the environment
Right.
on Krypton's harsh environment.
Right.
And basically, it was one of those things that he just wanted to see the results. And
Being basically a cold calculating scientist.
exactly. And might I add, this is one of those things that they perfected the cloning technology at that time. Finally, it got to a point where
It adapted so much from after being cloned and torn apart multiple times, that it started killing off the wild animals that was killing it.
and then eventually all those wild animals went extinct to the point where it started roaming the planet looking for other things to kill, other people to kill,
Yeah, it looked for anything that might be a possible threat to it.
its existence.
Right.
So what ended up happening is that it ended up turning on its creator. And its creator was like, oh, it's turned out to be the ultimate being, the ultimate predator, blah, blah, apex predator of this planet. And to show its gratitude, Doomsday slaughtered all the scientists that were involved in that project, those who didn't die off from old age.
Right.
But there was a supply ship that came to Krypton at that time.
Right.
And it hopped aboard that supply ship, and thus, once it got on that supply ship and went to another planet, it started killing the beings of that planet too. Till finally, it was being stopped by the hierarchy and also the super beings of that planet at the time, created themselves in terms of becoming the light being
The light being was known as Calaton.
Right. Calaton was the being that basically was able to stop Doomsday in his tracks. And once they did that, then Doomsday was killed officially. But that wouldn't stay for long because, as we've just stated, it had now learned to regenerate from whatever injuries or whatever was thrown at it. And even if it died, you can't kill it the same way twice.
And so the thing was, once they, the beings of that planet, Calaton, had subdued Doomsday, basically they wrapped him up in a burial outfit and tied his arms behind his back so tightly that it wouldn't be able to get out or get away, just in case they didn't want to take any chances.
Right.
And they put it into a specialized ship and sent it far off world, so that way it would never bother that planet again. Unfortunately, that particular ship crash landed in Earth's distant past and went way deep underground.
Because it crashed, and basically it was still comatose and hadn't regenerated to come back to life yet. So once it woke up, several thousand years, or who knows how many thousands of years, or it could be
Whatever
years,
time that passed.
however much time that passed, it found a way to wake up and then started pounding on its outside, on the inside, trying to find a way to escape. In the original story, Doomsday is coming. And once that was taking place, Superman found out that he had to take on that being once again. Might I add, too, the other villain...
You're talking about once again, because at that time, that was the first time.
That was the first time. But then, that was during a storyline called The Reign of the Superman that we discussed.
Well, actually, the death and return of Superman and the reign of the Superman.
Right. And then, we already know about the cyborg Superman that we discussed about. Well, the cyborg Superman had basically placed a device on Doomsday so that way he could track it after the end of that storyline.
Yeah, because basically after Superman and Doomsday fought and both of them died in the battle, at one point Project Cadmus, which is a top secret scientist or science organization, wanted to keep Doomsday's body to see if they could clone it or use it as a weapon or of sorts.
Weaponize it, yes.
Weaponize it, but the cyborg Superman, trying to pass off as the real Superman at the time, took the Doomsday's body and attached it to an asteroid in space just to make sure that it wouldn't trouble the Earth again, kind of like what those beings that created Calaton had done. But unfortunately what had happened was cyborg Superman left like a marker or some kind of device on that asteroid should Doomsday wake again in space, or should he awaken again. Unfortunately, which leads to the events of Superman Doomsday, Hunter Prey.
Right.
Doomsday, the asteroid then hits the planet of Apocalypse, which is the head home planet of the major bad guy known as Darkseid.
Yes.
And so basically, Doomsday comes to life on the planet, because they show him. I mean, right before they have him thrown into space, Doomsday laughs, and then that's the last we see of him with that device attached to the asteroid. But then once the reign of the Superman and the return of Superman, all that had taken place.
Yes.
Then Doomsday crash landed on Apocalypse and then started slaughtering the beings on Apocalypse once again. And even Darkseid was given pause because Darkseid couldn't even stop him.
Oh yeah. Planetary serial. Basically, Doomsday, as we were trying to explain, is he was a planetary serial killer. He just went around destroying anything that was a threat to him, no matter what.
And eventually got to that planet that created the energy being known as Calaton. But eventually, when it made its way to Apocalypse at some point, because first Earth was there, then it was thrown into space, but then it crash landed on Apocalypse. And then the process started all over again. And the way that was found out was then that little device on that asteroid was left behind by the cyborg Superman.
It was a piece of himself.
Superman, and then
because basically he took the body of one of Darkseid's soldiers and reworked the DNA and reworked the machinery so that way he resembled the cyborg Superman, but albeit now just a red armored cyborg version of himself.
Right.
And this time around, he was basically working with Doomsday because he still had revenge on the mind for Superman. Superman was brought to not Darkseid, but Apocalypse to take on Doomsday. Then that's where the mother box is starting to reveal the history of Doomsday.
Right.
And where he came from and how he came to be and where he was going.
Oh, and at some point in the storyline, within that Hunter Prey storyline, Doomsday was sent back to that planet that had defeated him, that with that being known as Calaton that had defeated him before. Unfortunately, just like we said, Doomsday cannot be defeated the same way twice, and Doomsday basically literally ripped that energy being apart in half.
Yes, and that energy being was like, how we couldn't destroy it? What happened this time around? Superman basically did not know, but at the time, the reader is given information just to let them know Doomsday adapts to whatever thing that killed it the first time around. When Superman tried to take him on the second time around, this time Doomsday's body was able to adapt to the Kryptonian, was able to pierce him and stab him in different various parts of his body, Superman's body, just so that way he would be able to take out that Kryptonian.
And plus Superman couldn't touch him or whatnot. But the way ultimately in that storyline, the only way to defeat Doomsday was to send him to the end of time. Because
entropy, there's nothing there. It's a black hole.
Because remember, the Mother Box helped Superman gain some kind of armor and use even a shield not a shield, but a sword. Normally, Superman doesn't use a sword, but Superman had no choice but to use a sword against Doomsday. And it was only mildly effective against Doomsday to the point where they had to use the Mother Box to basically him and Wave Rider, which is another DC hero too as well, a time-traveling hero, which we can get into another time. Basically, they had to send Doomsday to the end of time.
The story itself, that was the only way they can defeat Doomsday, was to take him to the end of time.
Because Doomsday can't defeat the end of time.
Exactly. Nobody could defeat the end of time.
Exactly.
That's not going to happen. Basically, Doomsday
was bred to kill other Kryptonians, specifically, period. Even though he went about other planets killing off the populations, if he saw Superman, he would see his creator, Bertrand, which was on early Krypton as well. So
he basically was bred to only kill Kryptonians. And that's the thing. They kept sending him out as a baby. That's where he started to develop a genetic hatred for Kryptonians. And eventually...
Specifically, so, because he could still go on and kill other people on the planet or other planets, like he was a planet serial killer, like we just mentioned before. But if he sees or detects any kind of Kryptonian, that's where he'll see his creator, Bertrand, and wants to go and zero in on Superman himself, which is the last Kryptonian.
Exactly. Or more, not technically, he's not the last Kryptonian
but
now, because
one of the last
Kryptonians.
Right.
But he would kill any other being or whatnot until he killed whoever he needed to kill to get to the Kryptonians. But getting back to my point, Superman was a Kryptonian. That's the reason why they fought, because basically you have the apex predator versus the apex protector, and the two of those came together and fought to the point where they were at a stalemate with each other. But Doomsday was starting to get the upper hand, of course. But again, he had to be taken to the end of time to defeat him because there was no other way to do it.
And then eventually, Doomsday would pop up in other parts of the DC universe to trouble the DC universe again. Eventually, later on down the line. But that's just another story for another time, because we've already covered the reign of the Superman and the death of Superman. And then the next story after that is basically Superman, Doomsday, Hunter, Prey. The next storyline, we could discuss that, and we could also discuss Superman Doomed, which takes place during the DC era of the New 52, which deals with a different variation of Doomsday, but nonetheless, it was still Superman and Doomsday going at it, but albeit a very different take on it.
Of course, because it was the Doomsday virus, but we won't even go there.
Right.
But in any case, if you have any questions or any comments, or if you have any corrections you want to throw at us, you could reach us at thecomicanthologist@gmail.com. This is us signing out, saying have a good evening, and if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button and take it easy. Peace.